She was the villain. She was the third person in the marriage. She needed to rehabilitate her image.
I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
Princess Anne stood up and broke the royal rules in front of everyone, and the palace would never be the same. King Charles just sat there, stuck between the woman he loved and the sister who refused to stay quiet. Tune in, because after Anne's shocking words, the whole royal family started falling apart faster than anyone could stop. A crown divided. The banquet hall at Buckingham Palace glittered under chandeliers that had seen more betrayals than celebrations. Every corner smelled of polished wood, beeswax, and the heavy perfume of old roses. On the surface, everything gleamed with tradition, but beneath the golden glow, the air was heavy, thick with something colder, something that didn't belong to the show of royal perfection. But behind the smiles, a single secret waited to shatter it all. Princess Anne didn't drift through the crowd like the others. She moved with the kind of focus that made people step aside without realizing why. Her boots hit the marble floor with a steady rhythm, deliberate and sharp, as if marking time in a countdown no one else could hear. She didn't need a microphone. She didn't need a podium. She had her voice, sharp enough to cut through centuries of ceremony. Queen Consort. The words dropped into the room like stones into a silent lake. Heads snapped up. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the marble statues seemed to flinch under the weight of what had just been said. Camilla blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Her fingers adjusted the heavy diamond bracelet on her wrist, a movement so small it would have gone unnoticed on any other night. But not tonight. Tonight, every glance, every breath, every tremor was magnified. Anne wasn't asking for clarification. She wasn't correcting a slip of the tongue. She was making a statement, and the room heard her loud and clear. Breaking royal protocol in public was the kind of offense that could end careers, ruin reputations, spark scandal. But Anne didn't flinch. She had never cared much for delicate traditions when they stood in the way of truth. For a few seconds that stretched like an eternity, no one moved. Some guests dropped their eyes to their plates, pretending to study the intricate gold patterns that ringed the edges. Others stared straight ahead, their faces carved into masks of polite indifference. Only the faintest creak of leather shoes against marble betrayed the tension bleeding into the room. King Charles sat rigid at the head of the table, his knuckles white against the stem of his wineglass. He stared forward, jaw tight, caught between the woman he had loved for decades and the sister who now threatened to shatter the fragile image they had tried so hard to rebuild. Everyone had heard the late Queen's decree. It had been crystal clear. Camilla was to be Queen Consort. No more, no less. A compromise born of necessity, an agreement to soothe an uneasy public and protect the monarchy's aging frame from yet another scandal. And yet, barely a year later, the title had begun to slip away. First, it disappeared from whispers, then from polite conversation, then from official programs. Now it had vanished altogether, as if it had never existed. Queen Camilla, not Queen Consort, just Queen. Anne wasn't about to let that lie sit uncontested. The press, sharp-eyed and hungry, would devour this moment before dessert was even served. Somewhere, a courtier was already calculating how to spin it, how to patch the gaping hole Anne had just punched through the evening's careful choreography. But some holes can't be patched. Anne's message was clear. The monarchy owed the public more than polished illusions. It owed them the truth. And she would not stand quietly while that truth was buried under velvet and pearls. Camilla shifted slightly in her chair, lifting her chin a fraction in an attempt to reclaim her dignity. But dignity, once cracked, is a hard thing to repair, especially when everyone is watching. The room around her had changed. What had started as a celebration of continuity had curdled into something colder, heavier, a gathering of ghosts, not guests. Anne sat back slowly, her face carved from granite, her hands perfectly still in her lap. She had said her piece. She would not explain herself. She did not need to. The damage was done. Palace aides along the walls stood even straighter than usual, their expressions locked into blank masks. They knew better than to react, but tension rippled through them like a wave. Some clutched the edges of trays a little too tightly. Others glanced, just briefly, at the grand double doors that led out of the banquet hall. Somewhere beyond those doors, the world was already changing. Whispers would turn to headlines. Headlines would turn to questions. Questions would turn to doubts. And doubt once planted grows faster than any royal decree can outrun. Anne's challenge wasn't a petty swipe. It was a strike at the very heart of royal legitimacy. She had wielded her words like a blade, slicing through the web of careful half-truths spun over the past year. This wasn't just about Camilla's title. It was about the promises made to a nation, about the sacred trust between crown and people, about the price of rewriting history for convenience. It was a message to every lord and lady in that room. Loyalty to the throne must never come at the cost of loyalty to the truth. A clock chimed somewhere deep within the palace. The sound seemed louder than usual, echoing off the marble and silk, marking time in a room that had suddenly lost all sense of it. Camilla reached for her wine, her hand trembling slightly before she steadied it. She raised her glass in a small, defiant toast to no one in particular, a silent act of rebellion against the humiliation settling around her shoulders. The guests, trained to respond to cues like dancers in an endless ballet, raised their glasses too. But their eyes betrayed them. Some glanced at Anne, some at Charles, some at Camilla herself. Everyone was calculating, measuring, wondering which way the wind would blow next. Anne's gaze remained steady. She didn't toast. She didn't drink. She didn't move. She had already said everything she needed to say. The monarchy was shifting under their feet, and no amount of ceremony could stop it now. Somewhere in the shadows of the palace, where real power moves in silence, the first cracks had begun to widen. And for once, it wasn't the tabloids or the politicians driving the change. It was the monarchy itself. Ghosts of the past. Before the cameras, before the pageantry, before the headlines, there had been only two people and a future that crumbled before it even had a chance to be real. Princess Anne and Andrew Parker Bowles had shared a bond built not from obligation, but from choice. It was rare, fragile, and in the world they lived in, doomed from the start. Andrew's Catholic faith was the quiet wall that neither of them could climb. The rules of royal blood ran deeper than affection, deeper than will, deeper than anything Anne could offer in protest. She couldn't marry him without tearing holes through the very church that crowned her family, and so the impossible choice was made for her. Love ended, not in betrayal, not in anger, but in the slow, suffocating grind of tradition. Anne buried it. She wore her loss the way soldiers wear old wounds, hidden under medals and smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Duty demanded that she move forward. History demanded she forget. But forgetting wasn't in Anne's nature. The world kept spinning, indifferent. And into that space where something beautiful had been carved out of Anne's life, Camilla entered, casual as a hand brushing crumbs from a table. At first it seemed a coincidence. Camilla crossed Andrew's path, captured his attention, and married him. No grand declarations, no sweeping romance, just a quiet, undeniable claim on what Anne had been forced to relinquish. It might have passed if it had ended there. It didn't. Camilla didn't just take Andrew. Years later, she found Charles. She found the future king. To Anne, it was more than just history repeating itself. It was an invasion. Camilla wasn't just a face at family events. She became the living symbol of everything Anne had lost and everything she had been told she couldn't have. By the time Charles and Camilla stood together at the altar in 2005, Anne's heart was already a battlefield layered with old scars. The photographers caught what they could. Tight smiles, careful handshakes, choreographed warmth. But the real story wasn't in the photos. It was in the space between them, the frozen air that not even crowns and tiaras could melt. Anne's expression that day wasn't just about her brother's second chance. It was a silent reckoning, a reminder that forgiveness might be demanded by tradition, but it could never be commanded by decree. The coldness didn't thaw with time, not when Anne named Andrew godfather to her daughter Zara, not when family gatherings placed Anne and Camilla in the same rooms, exchanging words as brittle as frost-covered leaves. Even as Camilla clawed her way closer to the throne, Anne never played along. She never pretended to forget who had been hurt first. Camilla's proximity to power didn't make Anne flinch. If anything, it sharpened her resolve. Every step Camilla took toward the crown only reminded Anne how far tradition had forced her to step back. And Anne, the unwavering defender of the old ways, refused to let that betrayal be swept under the embroidered rugs of palace history. The bitterness was a river running just beneath the surface, invisible to the public, obvious to everyone who mattered. Inside the palace walls, whispers never really died. Footmen, maids, advisors, all of them knew the truth in the way a tree knows a coming storm by the shift of the wind. They saw it in the quick glances, the shortened conversations, the polite excuses to exit a room a little faster. Camilla wore her new role like a gown stitched too tightly. It fit, but only just. No matter how many charities she sponsored, no matter how many smiling photos she offered to the world, she couldn't erase the silent judgments trailing her every move. Anne's loyalty had always been to the monarchy, but even more so to her mother's memory. Queen Elizabeth had built her reign on an iron will cloaked in velvet. Her decrees were not suggestions. They were foundations. And Anne knew that if the Queen had insisted Camilla be known as Queen Consort, it wasn't from hesitation. It was from purpose. It was a shield, a boundary, a final line drawn in a life defined by discipline. Anne wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for that memory, for that boundary, for everything the late Queen had spent 70 years protecting. Every time a newspaper headline dropped the word consort, Anne felt the crack widen. Every time a news anchor spoke of Queen Camilla without a second thought, it chipped away at something sacred. And when the moment came in the banquet hall, when the gold and glitter weren't enough to hide the creeping rot underneath, Anne didn't hesitate. She cut through the noise with a single correction, sharp and clean. A reminder that not all traditions were flexible, that not all lines could be blurred. She didn't do it for applause. She didn't do it for politics. She did it because sometimes silence is a betrayal too. Beyond the palace gates, the public had begun noticing the shift without quite understanding it. Approval ratings, once a sleepy formality, started to swing more wildly. Discussions once confined to gossip magazines crept into newspapers with national reach. The question wasn't just whether Camilla deserved the crown, it was whether the monarchy itself could survive pretending nothing had changed. Inside the palace, the walls seemed to close in tighter. At formal dinners, seating charts grew complicated. Invitations were worded more carefully. Smiles stretched thinner. Camilla, never truly at ease, even in the best of times, became even more guarded. Her laughter at events was a little too bright. Her compliments were a little too rehearsed. She fought the rising tide with every tool she had: charity galas, interviews, carefully staged photographs of family togetherness. But the current pulled stronger each day. Anne didn't wage a public campaign. She didn't have to. Truth, once spoken aloud, tends to grow on its own. And the truth was simple, Dot. Some things, once broken, can't be pieced back together with ceremony and crowns. Dot, they stay broken. And sometimes they become the kind of fracture that splits history in two. The heir, the crown, and the rift. The crown had never been about one person. It had always been about the next. About survival. About keeping the bloodline moving forward no matter what had to be sacrificed along the way. King Charles knew it. Princess Anne knew it. Even Queen Camilla, somewhere behind her careful smiles, must have known it too. The moment Charles announced William and Kate as the new Prince and Princess of Wales, it was meant to be a celebration. Cameras flashed, crowds waved flags. Every corner of the kingdom buzzed with the fantasy of continuity. But inside Buckingham Palace, something shifted, something hard, something cold. The move wasn't just ceremonial. It was strategic. It was a message written in titles and handshakes, saying loudly what no one dared whisper. The future belonged to the younger generation. And Camilla, despite the rings and robes, was not part of it. Outwardly, the royal family maintained the act. Public events were choreographed with mechanical precision. William and Kate stood front and center, the perfect couple for a kingdom desperate for fresh air. Camilla and Charles, always slightly behind, always slightly less luminous, played their roles with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. But the division was there, pulsing under every engagement, every balcony appearance, every cautious press release. William had grown into the role the public demanded of him: calm, poised, reliable. He had inherited not just Diana's eyes, but her instinct for reading the public mood. He knew where the winds were blowing. He didn't need to shout or rebel. All he had to do was wait. Kate, by his side, had done something even rarer. She had built herself not just into a future queen, but into a symbol of everything the public missed about the monarchy. Grace without arrogance, strength without scandal, compassion without spectacle. Together, they were the future. Camilla knew it. Charles knew it. And that knowledge turned every family gathering, every planning meeting, into a battlefield fought with glances, with silences, with cold, precise decisions. The public fell in love with Kate almost effortlessly. Her easy charm, her steady presence, her devotion to charities and causes that mattered beyond the palace walls. She didn't chase the spotlight. She simply did the work, and the world noticed. The more they loved Kate, the harder it became to warm to Camilla. The old wounds surrounding Diana never truly healed. Every time the media captured a photo of Kate comforting a child, every time she was compared to Diana in glowing terms, it reopened those wounds. Not for the public, for the palace. Camilla had spent years trying to scrub away the stains of the past. Years of careful appearances, hand-picked interviews, staged moments of domestic bliss. But no amount of effort could rewrite the story that the public had already decided on. She was not the beloved princess. She was the shadow behind her. William never said it aloud. He didn't need to. His actions spoke clearly enough. He performed his duties with Camilla. He acknowledged her with the bare minimum required by protocol. But warmth, affection, public defense, none of that ever came. The message was clear: respect, not love. Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Courtiers who once lined up to praise Camilla's resilience now kept their praise muted, hedged with caution. Advisors leaned harder toward William and Kate, placing bets on a future they saw coming faster than anyone had anticipated. The tension bled into planning sessions. Every public appearance became a negotiation. How close would Camilla stand to Kate? Would William mention her in speeches? Would Kate acknowledge her with a smile? Even the smallest decisions became weighted with meaning. A glance here, a pause there, a missed toast. Each one dissected by the media and the public like tea leaves promising signs of what was to come. The coronation, meant to be a crowning moment for Charles and Camilla, exposed the cracks for everyone to see. Camilla's crowning drew polite applause. But when William and Kate stepped forward, when the public caught a glimpse of their future king and queen, the cheers shook the stone walls. No one missed the symbolism, not even Charles. Behind the scenes, plans began to change, quietly, slowly, without announcement. Camilla's role, once seen as fixed, now felt increasingly ceremonial. Her influence, once bolstered by Charles's affection, started to shrink. William and Kate didn't challenge her openly. They didn't have to. The public did it for them. The shift was relentless. Invitations came, bearing their names first. Charity events had sought their patronage over hers. international tours highlighted them as the face of modern royalty. Every headline, every photograph, every breathless tabloid story reinforced the same idea. The monarchy's future was already here. Camilla, trapped between the life she had fought so hard to claim and the life that no longer welcomed her, could only hold her ground as best she could. But it was a losing battle. The press, once cautiously respectful, grew bolder. Articles praising Camilla's quiet dignity became fewer. Stories focusing on William and Kate's growing popularity flooded the pages. Comparisons to Diana became more frequent. Kate's star rose higher. Camilla's flickered. Inside the palace, the atmosphere chilled. Meetings shortened, conversations tightened. Staff members, always experts at reading tides, began aligning themselves more visible with the younger royals. For Charles, the cost of loyalty grew heavier. He loved Camilla, that hadn't changed. But the monarchy, the crown itself, demanded more than personal feeling. It demanded survival. And survival meant embracing the future. Anne watched it all unfold with the same quiet intensity that had defined her confrontation at the banquet. She had said her piece. The rest, she knew, was inevitable. The crown would move forward, and this time it would leave no room for mistakes. A throne at war with itself. Buckingham Palace had survived wars, fires, scandals, and abdications. It had seen kings fall and queens rise and had outlasted enemies from inside and out. But the cracks that now crawled through its marble halls were different. They weren't loud, they weren't harsh. They were slow, quiet, and inevitable. After Queen Elizabeth's death, the glue holding the royal family together vanished. What was left behind wasn't unity. It was a battlefield without clear sides, a family stitched together by duty and pulled apart by ambition, resentment, and survival. King Charles sat at the center of it, trapped in a dilemma of his own making. His loyalty to Camilla, once a private rebellion against public expectation, now threatened to cost him everything he had fought for: the respect of his people, the survival of the crown. Camilla's title, once a careful compromise, now sat like a thorn in the public's eye. Every mention of Queen Camilla in newspapers sparked subtle unease. Every event where she stood beside Charles deepened the divide between appearance and feeling. Inside the palace walls, courtiers and advisors shifted like sand, aligning themselves more carefully with the future. The atmosphere grew clinical, strategic. Loyalty wasn't about affection anymore. It was about survival. The monarchy needed William and Kate. Everyone knew it. They were the lifeboat in a sea of changing tides, the bridge between the ancient and the modern. Their popularity wasn't a trend. It was a lifeline. Camilla knew it too. Every handshake, every appearance, every carefully staged photograph was another reminder that she could not erase history. She could only hope to survive it. As months passed, the signs multiplied. At royal events, Kate's smiles drew longer applause. William's speeches made headlines, while Charles's gestures barely rippled across the news cycle. Photos of Camilla, no matter how polished, were increasingly crowded out by images of Kate kneeling to speak to children, laughing with veterans, standing poised with world leaders. The shift wasn't orchestrated by a grand strategy. It happened the way all real change happens, slowly, then suddenly. Courtiers planned events with William and Kate as centerpieces. Commonwealth tours were scheduled with them as the star attraction. Charities fought for their patronage. Foundations once loyal to Charles and Camilla began quietly pivoting their resources toward the younger royals. And Charles, burdened by history, love, and inevitability, watched it unfold. He knew that any attempt to fight it would only hasten the damage. The monarchy wasn't invincible. It never had been. It survived by sensing danger early and adjusting course before it was too late. And the danger was clear. The public didn't hate Charles. They didn't hate Camilla either. But they didn't love them the way they loved William and Kate. And in the delicate world of royal survival, love mattered more than lineage. Princess Anne saw it all with the same steely clarity that had driven her to speak out at the banquet. She had fought to preserve her mother's wishes, but she understood the game better than most. The monarchy would endure, but only if it embraced what came next without clinging too hard to what was already slipping away. Inside the palace, meetings grew colder, more transactional. Discussions about Camilla's future role became more frequent, whispered in hallways and behind locked doors. There would be no formal demotion, no public rebuke, just a gradual, careful withdrawal from the center stage. Plans were quietly adjusted. Future ceremonies were redesigned with William and Kate in mind. Public communications shifted their tone. Press officers briefed the media with subtle language, emphasizing the future of the monarchy and the next generation. Camilla, once fought for so fiercely, now found herself slipping into the role of a placeholder. Important, respected, but increasingly peripheral. It wasn't personal. It was structural. The crown demanded survival, and survival meant change. Camilla kept moving forward, maintaining her composure in public, attending engagements, supporting causes. But those closest to her saw the shift. They saw the guarded smiles, the exhaustion behind the eyes. They saw a woman fighting to stay relevant in a system that was moving past her. Charles struggled too. Torn between the loyalty of a husband and the duty of a king, he carried the burden in silence. Every decision he made, every event he attended, weighed against the ticking clock of public opinion. He could not protect Camilla and the monarchy at the same time. Not anymore. And as the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's death approached, the symbolism became impossible to ignore. Plans for the commemoration were centered not on Charles, but on William and Kate. Their faces led the announcements. Their names dominated the invitations. Their presence became the centerpiece of the remembrance. It was subtle, it was polite, but it was merciless. Camilla stood at Charles's side, smiling for the cameras, nodding through speeches, applauding tributes. But the future was already slipping from her grasp, carried forward by younger hands. In private, some courtiers spoke of the inevitable. When the time came, when Charles's reign ended, Camilla's role would be gracefully reduced. No drama, no scandal, just a gentle retreat into the background of history. The monarchy would present it as continuity, as respect, as tradition. But the truth would be simpler. The future had chosen its champions, and Camilla was not among them. Anne, William, Kate, they understood. Maybe they didn't speak of it openly. Maybe they didn't celebrate it. But they knew. The crown wasn't just about bloodlines. It was about survival, about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Buckingham Palace gleamed under the setting sun, the Union Jack fluttering against a crimson sky. But behind the golden gates, the real story played out in silence and smiles too tight to reach the eyes. A throne once thought unshakable was shifting again, carried forward by winds no one could command. What if everything Anne said was not just a warning? What if the real battle for the throne isn't happening on the balcony, but behind closed doors? Leave your thoughts in the comments, like and subscribe for more.